Buddy, Matt Parrino, Ryan Talbot with you back in your life one day later, as we said we would be. Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, Josh Allen. We even heard from Terrell Bernard today at One Bills Live. And this episode is a reaction podcast as we get into everything that that was noteworthy. And I think the best place to start, Ryan, is with Josh Allen. His first comments since the Stefon Diggs trade. We're going to get into that, what it all means, some takeaways from that. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Matt. Excited to talk about all things Bills from today's press conferences.
So, when with Josh coming to the podium, everybody knew that the big topic was going to be Diggs, and that was pretty much outside of maybe a minute or two where he was talking about golfing with Tiger Woods, dominated that press conference. And, the big things for me is thankful, right? Like thankful for the 4 years with Diggs. He made sure to get that point across. He sent a text message to Diggs after the trade to tell him as much, said he wishes him all the best of luck in Houston. Probably not when the Bills and Texans play this season. But it seemed like a Josh Allen that knows what Stefon Diggs meant for him over the course of his career, but at the same time seemed like there was an underlining, not even underlining, it was pretty overlining excitement about the potential of what this offense could look like in its next iteration here.
It's okay to get younger. He said something along those lines, and he's right. And, we don't have that magic 8 ball to know how the draft's going to pan out for the Bills in terms of who they potentially end up adding at wide receiver. But they did already get a little bit younger, adding a Curtis Samuel, who's in his late 20s. And this is another year of Khalil Shakir coming on in year 3 where you expect him to take another step. Dalton Kincaid had a huge rookie year, and he's only going to be asked to do more in year 2. So, you want the weapons around your playmaker to be guys that can grow and can get better year over year. And, Stefon Diggs is still a great player, but he was getting to that age, getting to that point now where you can't expect him in his 30s to continue to get better year after year. He went to the Texans. It's a fresh start for him. Allen was classy about it. You didn't expect anything else. He'll never throw a teammate under the bus, but he said all the right things. Love him like a brother. Thanking him for everything that he's done. So wasn't surprised at all with Josh's comments, Matt.
So I asked him a question pretty deep into the press conference. He talked about it. He kind of gave his reactions a little bit. And I think we learned quite a bit about maybe what was at the core of the issue, whatever the issue was with Diggs. And here's the question that I asked. I mean, I set it up with, listen, over the last couple of years, really back to the Cincinnati game, the perception has been that there's been a rift between the two of you. I mean, you turn on ESPN and it's another kind of the newest storyline of the week on what's going on with Josh Allen, what's going on with Stefon Diggs, the relationship there. I asked him, what did you learn about that now, like that relationship and the way that it played out in the public setting, now going into your 7th year where that leadership role has to take the next step? And I'm going to read his entire quote and then we can kind of have a conversation about it. I think this is, as a franchise quarterback, guys that get to their second contract, you're not getting paid just to be the quarterback. You're getting paid to be the best leader that you can be. The best quarterback obviously comes with that. So leadership looks like a lot of different things. You wear many hats in the building. Sometimes it's not the easiest thing. And especially when I feel like I'm one of the guys, and sometimes I have to remind myself that you're looked at a little bit differently. Guys are relying on you a little bit more and understanding that, but trusting your coaching staff, trusting your teammates around you, and having the type of humility where it's like you're able to say when and where you're wrong. And I think that's what we've learned over the last few years, not just with him, Diggs, but with other receivers and with other players as well. It's everybody's got a different type of relationship. Everybody has something different that makes them tick. And that's they're using this time right now to utilize and find what does make every single guy tick. I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff in there. Your first thoughts.
Yeah, first thoughts. Again, Josh Allen, he's right. He's not just the franchise quarterback. He needs to be the leader of this team. And, he's taken on that role, and it's on the field, it's showing up to these voluntary workouts and OTAs, it's golfing with teammates like Dalton, Kincaid, spending time with these guys off the field. But it's all about finding what makes every person tick. What can you do to build these relationships up? What can you do to make them fit into this offense? Or, what are you looking for potentially in this offense? So, Allen, to me, you're right. There is a lot of layers to that. But for me, it just stood out that he realizes now entering year 7, this is that year where, or it's been those last few years actually, where he has to be the face of the franchise, not just to the fan base, but also within that locker room, knowing that players are going to come to him. It's important for him to lead by example. And he's done that over the course of his entire career.
That is a really delicate balance and a difficult and challenging one too, because I think one of the things that makes him so popular in the room is that he's so relatable to so many different people. And so like when you go up to Josh Allen in the locker room and you're saying Khalil Shakir as a second year, 5th round draft pick wide receiver down the depth chart, he's going to treat you the same way that he treats Stefon Diggs, right? Mm-hmm. Because he is one of the guys. He jokes around in a different way. But I wonder when you have the weight of a city, the weight of the organization, and the weight of the expectations of all these other competitors in the building, that if being one of the guys doesn't necessarily play with everybody. And I think for Stefon Diggs, I think that probably rubbed him the wrong way in a lot of different ways, because he's kind of operating in his own space, putting everything he has into being the best version of himself, the best kind of player to be able to ascend to different places. And I think that that's a pretty good place to look at maybe where the disconnect happened between the two of them. And he also talked about like having a humility, and part of that to me makes me think about like maturity and being able to handle when maybe, you did something wrong, wearing that. And I think that he's gotten better at that over the course of his career, like putting it all on his shoulders. And it's kind of like the burden that quarterbacks have to have in this league because of the money, because of the position that they play.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there is no one way of being a leader to a team. There have been different people who have had great amounts of success being a Stefon Diggs type, kind of going about your business and things of that nature. But there have also been players who have had a great deal of success being one of the guys. I think of Patrick Mahomes as being one of the guys in KC, but knowing, what his role is as a leader. Tom Brady is another one that I don't think it gets written about enough about how he was one of the guys going out with the teammates after games and hanging out with everyone. So there is no one right way to be a leader, but you're right. Maybe the way that Josh operated rubbed Diggs the wrong way. But Allen, as each year has gone on, he has found ways to build relationships with his teammates. That's what you want in a leader. He has found a way to lead this team to AFC's championship after another. And, now it's that next step in terms of trying to get them to that championship level. And like you said, he has the weight of an entire city on his shoulders, and that's not an easy thing to do.
I wonder how much like the personality match is important in quarterback number one weapon relationships. Because if you think about the two most recent elite quarterbacks, you mentioned Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, what was the constant of those two relationships? Now they were with tight ends, but Rob Gronkowski and Brady were best friends. Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes are best friends. I don't think Dawson Knox, who seems like a best friend of Allen at this point, is in that kind of air, like that ability to kind of be a playmaker. But you know who might be? And I asked a couple people about it today, including Sean McDermott, about Dalton Kincaid and whether or not like we're spending all this time talking about the wide receiver one, right? Well, maybe they have not wide receiver one, but weapon one in Dalton Kincaid on the roster. I think that there's already been a relationship that's been kind of, they're sprinkling little seeds of what could be a really potential great relationship between the two of them. And maybe that's more important than anything, is like maybe Diggs and Allen just didn't vibe enough. And after year after year after year, and all the like shortcomings that you kind of throw into that relationship, this could be the perfect time to pivot, trying to find what is that next thing going to be. And Ryan, how much could that affect the evaluations at wide receiver in this draft?
It could affect it in a big time way, because if you're going into this season thinking that Dalton Kincaid might be the player you're going to feed the ball to the most, maybe a true number one receiver isn't something that you need. And it's something that Brandon Beane alluded to. They don't have wide receiver one. He doesn't necessarily think you need a wide receiver one to have a successful offense in this league. And if you are going to run it or operate the passing offense through Kincaid, he had an unbelievable rookie season. He broke franchise records in year one. You expect him to be unlocked a little bit more in year two in terms of maybe using him further down the field, because he has that in his tool belt. It just wasn't, the opportunities didn't seem present or there as much as a rookie. And in this new scheme, he might just be getting the ball even more than what he did down the stretch as a rookie. So the relationship, though, Josh Allen said the day of the draft, he sent a text to Brandon Beane with 2 words, Dalton Kincaid, in it. So he was definitely on board with that last year, whether they had any kind of communication before the draft or not. But you've seen them kind of get closer over the rookie season, now having those outings together, golfing. So forming that bond, that relationship, and that chemistry is huge, because, to your point, Kincaid might end up being their leading receiver by the end of the year.
I think it's, transitioning here a little bit to Brandon Beane and some of the commentary that he had on the draft today. I mean, I think we come out of that conversation with him still kind of spinning the wheel a little bit as to what they can do. I mean, he basically mentioned that, listen, I'm always going to pick up the phone. I'm always going to be the one making a phone call. Like, don't rule out anything was the big takeaway. And I think, we didn't need today to, his past behavior indicates that. But, I thought his comments on the not needing a number one wide receiver were interesting, because there's so many examples around the NFL. And listen, how the Bills played once Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator, I almost think it's more conducive to not having a guy that you have to try to force feed. And I mean try to force feed, because not that like Diggs was ever like commanding targets, right? And I think he does in his own way. That's a separate conversation. But I mean, like, if you bring in somebody, if you spend a first round draft pick on a guy, there's this like urge or this feeling of responsibility to make sure that that person is involved. And I think if you go day 2, it's almost like, okay, you don't have to set up this level of expectation for the player, and you can let them find their own role within the offense while still allowing Josh to kind of operate and find, go through his progressions. He talked about that too a lot today when I asked him about Joe Brady and why he's confident in him. He's like, there's little things, little nuanced things that they've been spending the last couple of months looking at the tape of last season and noticing different like angles of plays and where he was looking at in reads in plays last season, where he's starting to kind of develop in that way, starting to see different things. And I think you could see even more things if you don't have that constant pressing need to force it to one person, because I don't care what anybody said last year with Stefon Diggs there is just this innate subconscious need to make sure that he's heavily involved. It's why he wanted out of Minnesota.
Yeah. And outside of the top 3 in this year's draft, with Adunze being number 3, Neighbors, obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., those guys will all go to teams where, they could potentially already have a good receiver on that roster, but there's going to be high expectations from day one. I think Brian Thomas Jr., who's in that second tier, I don't think necessarily that analysts, media members, fan bases would expect him to just emerge immediately as a wide receiver one. They just see that wide receiver one ceiling. So if they get a player like that, you don't have to force feed a player like Thomas Jr. the ball. But if you land that with one of these top 3 guys, they're going to get the lion's share of the targets, it feels like, in their whatever system they land in. So in Buffalo, like you said, if at pick 28 they do take a wide receiver, a Ladd McConkey, Xavier Legette, Xavier Worthy, they can be sprinkled into this offense, but they don't have to be the guy. And that's going to benefit the player in year one. It's going to benefit the entire offense in terms of, okay, well, this team might try to take Worthy away on a given week, but we can zero in on Kincaid and Shakir and whoever they zero in on a given week. You can change it up, because we saw that Joe Brady was willing to do different things based on opponent matchups, like the Cowboys game where the running game was working. So he stayed with it. He didn't go away from it. If something works, he'll stay with that. So I do like that talking point. If the Bills go with a defensive player or a lineman at 28 and they take a guy in round 2 or take a few guys later in the draft, they can all be parts of the offense, but they don't have to be that guy, the number one receiver year one. And for Josh Allen, it makes his life maybe a little bit easier too, where he can spread the ball around without having to worry about upsetting a player that wants the ball. And every player wants the ball, but Diggs was a little bit more animated about it at times throughout his career.
Did you miss all the press conferences today? Do you want all of the details? Well, after we end this episode, I'm going to be firing off a bunch of text messages to our Shout insiders to get them caught up on everything they missed today. You can become an insider right now by texting 716-528-6727. Become an insider, 2-week free trial. Perfect time. Draft next week. We're going to be firing that thing up quite a bit. The Shout text line, $3.99 a month after that. And the text line is brought to you by Carrie C. Byer, attorney with the law offices of Francis M. Litro, located at 237 Main Street in Buffalo, New York. If you or someone you know is seriously injured, give him a call, 716-852-1234, or check out litrolaw.com. Ryan, I think trade back. I kind of wish I didn't do the trade back scenario in my first mock because I think I'm going to be pretty redundant and I'm going to do it again in my final mock next week. I don't know. This is something that Brandon kind of alluded to today, and maybe he's trying to throw people off, balance here, but here's his comment. And we'll be looking to move the other way too in talking about potentially trading up, looking the other way, maybe trading back. If we did not draft Dalton Kincaid last year, I think we had some options to go back, and one that I really liked that would have put us into the second round, that would have added what I thought was a good asset to do that. So we'll do both ways. I think that's the best way to prepare, is to get ready for every scenario. So I think, to me, moving back seems so likely because of the teams that I think potentially could want to get up and into the back end of that first round. And of course, if the quarterbacks get pushed down and maybe JJ McCarthy doesn't go and people are lower on those next 3 than the mock drafts would have you to believe, then all of a sudden it might be a bidding war to get back up at the end of round 1 to get one of those quarterbacks. That's one scenario. Right. But then I look at a team like Washington, who I was listening to Daniel Jeremiah's media call. I'm only about 25% through because the thing went for like 2 hours. But he was asked from one of the Washington reporters about the needs past just getting the quarterback. And he's like, they got a ton of picks. They have a lot of needs, but Jeremiah said they have a lot of needs, but they also need a tackle. Like, their tackles are one of the worst groups in the league. And if you're the Bills and you're looking at this tackle group, and there's probably 6 that are going to go in the first round, if you're the Commanders and you want to get back in to get maybe that last tackle in 28 kind of range, I think they have pick 36 and pick 40. I don't know if you can get both of those, but if you can add a second, go to 36, get a third and maybe another fourth, and then maybe you can package a couple of those fourths and move back up into the third. So now you're talking about 2 picks in the second, 2 picks in the fourth. I think you roll the dice, and you much rather have that kind of those kinds of options, adding more players to the bunch rather than selling everything to go up and get one guy that is still a little bit of a dice roll.
Right. And, the teams trading up, quarterback's always the main option. And if a guy like Michael Penix Jr. is there late in round 1, there might be some teams that want to get up and get him because of that 5th-year option and how valuable that is at the quarterback position. It could be a team wanting to get one of those wide receivers for their quarterback, even if it's not necessarily one of the top 3 or 4 guys, but you want to get a weapon for your young guy. So there's always teams looking, and it wouldn't be a major trade up for those teams. And for the Bills, it wouldn't be a major trade down. And that's the trade-off. You're still going to get up one of the players that you likely wanted. Brandon Beane said today, more first round talent than last year, but not 28 players. So unless this board works out correctly for him, and a Cooper DeJean is there at 28, and they really like him, for instance, they have a first-round grade on him, they might stay put and they might draft him. But if that board is looking thin, or there's only one option left, and it's not necessarily a pressing need or a fit where that person's getting out of the field right away, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Brandon Beane traded down, because we've talked about this so many times, Matt. He was banking on getting a 3rd-round pick for that Tremaine Edmonds compensatory pick deal. It never happened. So now, instead of 2 picks on day 2, he just has that 1 right now. If you trade down, you might end up with a few. And if you can land a few top 90 players on a roster that is a Super Bowl contender, that could put you over the top more than one player at 28 and one player at 60. So if it's not a trade down in round one, I could see the Bills maybe staying put at 28, but then trading up in round two to get another valuable asset to them, someone that they think could also come in and be an immediate contributor. So there's so many different variations. You could end up with multiple top 90 picks, maybe 2 picks in the top 50 if you want to trade off of that number 60 pick in round 2, or even in the top 45, something like that. So Brandon Beane's not afraid to move up or down the draft board. That's one thing we've learned. He's going to be working the phones. And like you said today, teams in the top 10, top 15, they don't call the teams at the end of the draft saying, hey, you want to make a deal? But that doesn't mean he won't pick up the phone either and see what the options are in both areas.
I think another reason to kind of trade back and accumulate assets is thinking about the 2025 draft.
Yeah.
Like, if you can add even maybe another pick, like right now, the Bills are positioned to be super aggressive next year. And what are they going to desperately need next year? 2 things, potentially edge rusher and potentially a cornerback. This is not a strong edge rusher class. There's question marks about all of these top guys. You got, what's the kid's name? Dallas Turner, Latu, and then Jared Verse. All 3 of those guys have some kind of ding against them. And if you go and look at some big boards for next year's edge rusher class, I mean, I just pulled up one right here. Patrick Payton from Florida State, RJ Oben from Duke, and JT Tuamalu from Ohio State. Those are 1, 2, 3 in terms of edge rushers in next year's class. They're the number 4, number 5, and number 6 overall prospect on this big board. So if you're Brandon Beane sitting here looking at the future, it's like, okay, next year's going to be potentially a much better edge class. Maybe I can move up aggressively next year, get that edge rusher of the future. I could still take 2 or 3 wide receivers in this draft, and there's some fun day 3 options in a deep wide receiver class.
Right.
I just think that that's a better team building philosophy than going all out to go up and even get a Brian Thomas Jr., who I think, for as exciting as a player as he is, I think there's enough question marks to make it a little bit dubious of a move if you're giving up a ton of capital.
No, that's fair. And that's one part of being a GM. And unless you're on the hot seat and you're saying, I need to win now or I'm going to lose my job, you're always looking ahead. You're looking at potentially who's going to be in the next draft class. And one thing that GMs, I think, have to look at now too, Matt, is because of these NIL deals across the college football landscape, these drafts are not as deep anymore. A lot of guys that would have come out previously and been taken on day 3 are staying in because they're getting a nice chunk of change to play college ball. And in doing so, they can also improve their draft stock for the following season. So you're looking at the following year saying, okay, this is a really good class here. If I have enough assets, like you said, I can move up and I can get this edge rusher. I can move up and I can get this weapon or this offensive lineman, this defensive tackle, whatever the case may be. So that's part of it. And, Brandon Beane, in terms of the hot seat, there's absolutely no heat whatsoever on that chair. It's pretty much sitting on an ice throne right now because of the winning that he has done. So he can look ahead and he can think of 2025 and beyond.
One specific player I tried to get a little bit of intel on today was Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. I kind of used a nice little slick transition because Beane was talking about Micah Hyde. And so I said, speaking of Iowa DBs, how about Cooper DeJean, who obviously came in for a top 30 visit? And I kind of wanted to get an understanding of how the Bills view him. And he wouldn't really he didn't take the bait, if you will. Like, he wouldn't specifically say how the Bills would use him, but he did say that teams probably are going to be in a spot where it's like, no matter where your need is, whether it be safety or cornerback, you can have him come in and you could put him at one of those spots. And that's why the versatility is so valuable. But man, I think Cooper DeJean as even a low key, small trade up candidate wouldn't absolutely surprise me. Like, I think Bills fans have to start preparing themselves that there might be a small trade up if that's the case, but it might be for a defensive player.
He made 4 top 30 visits, Matt, because of the medical rechecks that he had to do because of his pro day being on April 15th, and the Bills were one of them. The other 3 teams all pick in front of Buffalo. So they might have to make a trade up to get in front of one of those teams. Now, one of them is I think it's Seattle at 16, but then you have Pittsburgh in the 20s. You have 2 teams in the early 20s that you would be competing with. And, if he gets by those first 2 teams, maybe you do try to leapfrog the third if you think that's the guy they're targeting. So, yeah, a small trade up with as many day 3 picks as the Bills have, I think it's certainly possible. It's certainly something that they're going to be analyzing, because I would anticipate him being one of those players that they have a first round grade on.
Interestingly enough, he made sure to mention the fact, oh, there is our little buddy. Hey,
Yeah.
dear little guy.
Reggie.
What's he doing?
Say hi to Matt.
Reg.
Reg.
Oh, you're not used to these afternoon shows, Reggie.
No.
You're like, what's going on here? This is my dad time.
Pretty much.
So Cooper DeJean, Brandon Beane kind of alluded to the fact that he was a lot of fun to spend a lot of time with. And you basically mentioned it too, that he was a guy that they spent a lot of time around. And I think like that versatility to me is what like elevates guys on Brandon Beane's board. So he's certainly somebody to keep an eye on. All right, where do you want to go next?
I was going to say we could still talk a little bit more about the draft, but I think we've kind of covered that while we talk McDermott if you want. Maybe some of the injury updates that they provided today. Either of those would be good.
Yeah, so a couple of updates. Matt Milano still working through things. I think that's going to be a situation where, man, we might get to training camp and he's working off to the side in some manner, like not ready to go yet. A little bit of a different injury, which they brought up earlier in the offseason. He's Von Miller's fine. He's healthy. Josh Allen said he's fine. He's healthy. Lyle Collins, their newest offensive lineman, Brandon Beane basically sees him as the backup right tackle at this point. And he made it specific that it was right tackle. He's got some guard flexibility, but I don't know how much they're going to cross train him. It might be a situation where like, okay, how much depth do we have on this offensive line at tackle before you make that decision? I think there's better options at the interior positions. But those were some of the updates that we got.
Yeah, and Lyle Collins, in terms of the comments about he is a right tackle, the Bills never want players coming into a season feeling that they have the job. And listen, Spencer Brown's not going to be beaten out by Lyle Collins, but it's good to give him legitimate NFL competition, a guy that started over 80 games in this league, someone that has been counted on by teams to play significant time, both at right tackle and early in his career at guard. Having that versatility will help. Collins will be very motivated to try to hit some of those targets in his contract, because the actual salary, as we've always learned, it's not what you first hear, up to $6.25 million. It's a pretty low end deal, but he can reach a lot of those escalators by playing, getting on the field and playing. So he'll be motivated though to put his best foot forward here in Buffalo.
There's a question here in the chat on YouTube, and it comes from Charles G. Milano injury is scary. Any thoughts if they take a linebacker in the draft? I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, They lost Tyrell Dodson. I think they're going to want to continue to add some depth, especially considering Milano and Bernard weren't available in the playoff game last year. So I think they're going to want to continue to add players. They haven't been super active outside of Nicholas Morrow, adding him, the former Philadelphia Eagles player. So, yeah, I definitely think linebacker is on the menu for the draft. I think that they've done really good work late day 2 and then on day 3 over the course, even with Dotson, who was a UDFA. So finding some talent at different spots. I think that Dorian Williams is a nice piece to have as your third guy. I think that they're going to probably cross train him a little bit to the point where maybe he's ready for a little bit more on his plate in year 2, because he gets the whole offseason to really zero in on it, work with Terrell Bernard, work with Matt Milano. I mean, Bernard said today that like the biggest key to his development last season was being able to kind of not only have that access to Bobby Babbage, but he'd go into Sean McDermott's office and they'd watch tape and then, get an understanding of what Sean McDermott wanted him to do out there. I think those kinds of things for young players, especially as they're ascending into their roles, that's massive. And I'm sure Sean McDermott doesn't want to put a lot of that on young players' plates, but in year 2, Dorian Williams is probably ready for more of it.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's like Terrell Bernard in terms of you didn't know what to expect, but you expect them to be more prepared by year 2. And obviously, I'm not saying he'll get on the field the way Bernard did in play, but he's that next man up right now in terms of the depth. And depending on how long this injury is with Milano or how long it takes him to rehab, he could see some time on the field at training camp. We'll get a better look at him there. In terms of drafting guys, yeah, I would anticipate with as many picks as the Bills have that they definitely draft a linebacker. They bring in some UDFAs. There's a player out of UB that plays linebacker, Andreessen, that I wouldn't be surprised if they brought in post-draft or late in the draft. I think that the Bills are always looking for talent at that position. I mean, they did a formal interview at the Combine with the best linebacker in this draft class, Peyton Wilson. So they're always looking. They're always talking to players, trying to get a feel for who fits into this offense. We don't know the specifics on the Matt Milano injury, but the same thing we keep hearing is they hadn't really seen anything like that injury in their times in the league, and they've been in the league for quite some time. So it's probably something unique that's going to take a little bit more time. And you hope that he's ready by week one, that he's ready at some point during training camp, but we don't know the exact details of it right now.
Another update we got was on Micah Hyde, whose charity baseball or softball game is a full go, and Josh Allen believes he'll be able to attend again this year. I think he's known around those parts as the home run king. He really gets out the bat
he
for
loves
those games.
The home run derby.
So Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott both have FaceTime Micah Hyde recently, and both said that he still doesn't know 100% what he's going to do. So still obviously going through the process of making his decision. It kind of feels like to me, Ryan, that maybe this is now set up for him to make that announcement at the softball game.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
With everybody there, with his teammates there. Retirement's always been kind of the way I thought this was going to end. And I think for him to kind of take the real time to think about it, make sure it's the right move for him to be able to share that moment. If that ends up being the case, I think it has the potential to be a really cool day in Buffalo.
I agree with that. I think that the softball game is one that Bills fans will want to attend. And, if he doesn't shut the door on his career, it almost also feels like it might just be Buffalo or nowhere. And what I mean by that is if there's an injury in season, maybe he'll be working out and ready to come in and help in that regard, knows the system, knows what he's doing. But if he was in a rush to find a new team, he would have already done so. He would have been highly coveted in free agency based on his experience and his talent. May not have broken the bank, but I'm sure there were plenty of teams that called his agent and wanted to know what was going on. So the fact that he's waited, the fact that he is still going through this process, trying to figure things out, tells me that he is more than okay if this is the end of his career, but maybe it is something where it's like, I'm going to work out. I'm going to be in good shape. And if you need me, my number.
Right. Very interested to see how that one materializes here over the next couple of weeks. Or unfolds, I should say. Last thing I wanted to hit on, Beane was asked about the depth of the wide receiver class. And, one of the things that I think an interesting point that he makes that I think we all have to consider when we're doing these mock drafts and thinking about where guys are going to end up. He's like, listen, they all have different skill sets. You got your guys that can run after the catch. You got your guys that have really good hands of the class, guys that maybe don't have as good hands, guys that are good separators, route runners, all those different, traits are great. But the one part of it that's so hard to figure out is what happens when they get in a room with these guys. Like, are they going to have the capacity mentally to be able to pick up what's a very complicated system? Somebody that now more than ever, they're going to need somebody that's ready to deliver from the very beginning. So I feel like if you get a draft guide up, like Dane Brugler's the beast, we had him on earlier in the week on the podcast, and you're going through all of the different wide receivers. I mean, to me, that's the things that I'm kind of looking for. Anybody that is willing to say something about these players' ability to comprehend complex concepts, and then also their ability to learn quickly, because you got to be a fast learner to be able to come in here and make the kind of progressions that they want you to make. And, that's the challenging part about not only for fans and media making these evaluations. A guy like Josh Allen, huge draft fan, obviously has a stake in who the Bills add at wide receiver. This is one of those things where it's like, all right, he doesn't know everything about all the different meetings.
Exactly. And there are the meetings. There's the combine. There's the pro days. There's the private workouts, 30 visits. There's the scouts attending multiple games of these players. But there's also the coaches calling the coaches of those players in terms of their college coaches and trying to do their homework on them and the assistants and how well do they pick up the offense. What are some things that make them stand out among this draft class? What can we expect? So I'm sure that at pick 28, there's going to be some really good players in terms of names that fans have heard of, receivers that you think have wide receiver one potential. But if the Bills pass on those players, I'm sure there is a reason for it, whether it's they weren't as graded as highly as the player that they end up taking, whether it's a receiver or another position. But there's so much due diligence that goes into this that Josh Allen just can't send a message to Beane right before the pick comes in or at 7:05 after they take their selfie at 7:04 and say, here's who I want you to draft tonight. Because as much as he might like players and watch players throughout the college football season, there's so many interviews and so much work that goes into this, from that personnel department to the scouts, that you just have to kind of trust them at the end of the day.
Trust us. Over the next couple of weeks here, we'll have you covered on all things NFL draft. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. It is going to be a fun final week. We're going to be pretty busy. Once the weekends, the next week begins, we're going to be all draft all the time. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. We'll be back early next week with your next show. Take care, everybody.